Welcome back to Talking South, everybody, and especially Sandy Schoelles, who is with us today to comment and analyze the latest data. Hello.
Hi there. Hi, everybody. Sandy.
So good to hear you. So, actually, Sandy is the whole reason for the topic of this of this episode 9 of Talking South, because she sent me this fantastic little article from Forbes magazine, and I got it, and I thought, okay, so Arctic sea ice. The picture is of course, this is not sea ice. It's not Arctic sea ice. It's high mountain ice, the kind of ice you find in high mountains, and which has traveled all the way down to the sea and been calved into the fjord. And so that's sort of Forbes magazine. They're telling you that, okay, so this is sea ice, but it's absolutely not. And so the rest of the headline is Arctic sea ice is growing faster than before, but there is a catch. And of course the catch is that it's not growing faster than before, but they can't write that in their headline. So of course, having seen a lot of these mainstream media articles over the years, I was very, very skeptical, and I think my very first comment back to Sandy was like, "Yeah, right," or something.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and you were going to do a rant on it.
Yeah, of course. This is like, this is what do you call it in English? This is science reporting. but it's like science reporting in the mainstream media, right? And it's
yes, and actually Forbes is a right to center leaning bias anyway.
Yeah, and but it's from when I was a kid or when I was a youth, I expected the big magazines and the big media to report correctly on things. So I had quite a journey with fact-checking this article. If you jump from the headline here and over to the text itself, you can see that it's not growing faster than before, but it's growing faster during winter months today than it did decades ago. So that's sort of, they couldn't put the fact about they are talking about the winter months. They couldn't put that in the headline, so you get the impression that it's growing all over, all through the year or whatever. Right. So I checked source checked this guy, Trevor Nace, the writer, and he admits it himself. He's not a climate scientist, or maybe a climate scientist, but he majored on geology of the Amazon rainforest. So that's quite a stretch from being an expert on
I'd say.
From being an expert on the Arctic. But okay, let's go through this. What they are actually saying here, and what NASA is also saying, because I read the linked NASA source, is that these recent years, or this recent decade, the ice is growing back. From the summer low, the ice is growing back faster in these recent years than it did when it didn't melt away as much, like 10 or 20 years ago. And I thought that was strange, because it ran counter to, my own experience with watching the ice. So, and in order to find out if they were clueless or if they actually had a point, I did some. I already have all the data stored on my computer, so I did some programming and graphing, and found quite an interesting thing. Just have to comment on this because, of course, he's not an expert. Trevor is not an expert on sea ice, so he's displaying. First, he displays high mountain ice instead of sea ice, just that the high mountain ice is out in the sea, and then he displays the summer extent instead of volume, because this article is actually, or the NASA report is actually about the growback of ice volume, which is what it really counts for the Arctic, the thickness and total volume. So he's displaying this 1 month graph for September extent, which is sort of nonsensical because that's only two-dimensional ice on the surface. And they also show this NASA rate of change, 12.8 per decade. But if you go to the entire year and you go to volume instead of extent, it's more like 22.8, So they will always show the, let's say, the most positive or the least catastrophic numbers and facts on here. So anyway, let's go to my first analysis. And what I've done here is I've compared the recent decade, 2009 to 18, that's the red graph, to the 10 years before that. So for every day here, that's, for instance, you have here on the tip of the red graph, you have December 11th, and then I've averaged all the December 11th ice volume data from 2009 and to 2018. Just added them all and the 10 days and divided the number by 10 to get the average. And the same thing for the rest of the year, and also for the 10 years before the last 10 years, which is the yellow graph. And then I got this nice little wave here, which really doesn't tell you very much. And it's sort of an optical illusion, because you seem to think that the distance between the yellow and red is greatest on the maximum ice day and on the minimum ice day, because that's where it looks to be greatest. But in between here you also have quite big differences. So in order to free myself from that illusion, I made a third graph here for the actual difference between those two graphs, and that's the blue line at the bottom here. And that was quite interesting, because you see here a blue graph that goes down almost the entire year, except for the 11 weeks from late April to about summer solstice.
Yeah.
And to look closer at that blue graph, I ginned it up or jazzed it up or enlarged it on the right side here. So here you see the same graph as down here, and but you can see more of the ups and downs in a bigger scope. So as I said, you have from where we are now, like mid-December, it's going down all the way down to late April, and it's a huge, very rapid increase up until about early July, and then it goes down again. And this is you have to remember, this is the difference between the previous decade and this decade. So what it means is that it means we are closing in, or we are sort of building more ice here during winter, so that the difference to earlier decades gets smaller for the winter months, just as the Forbes article said. But then you have this huge, very rapid melt from the year maximum ice when spring sets in and the sun starts heating it up. Then the latest decade makes a huge effort to increase the difference from the previous decade. But that only lasts for 11 weeks, and then it's all down again, and it's sort of compensating and either melting slowly or freezing rapidly, just as the Forbes article said. So the yellow graph is closing in on the red graph when you see the blue graph going down. Okay, is that is that at all understandable?
It is. I'm following it.
Okay, that's excellent. So, but because I was curious to see, because these are 10 years all smashed together in an average, 2009 to 18. So I was curious because, you know, I have been to university and kind of have a curious spirit. So I wanted to see the individual years, you know, 2009, 2010 alone, and compare them to the previous decade. And when I did that, I found a very, very strange or a very significant thing, because what I found was that not all the years go down like this during winter. In fact, it was only the 5 first of these years that went down during winter, where the difference to the previous decade went down during winter because it was freezing faster, like Forbes said. So that's the next slide. Here you see 2009 to 13. So it's a very pronounced downturn of the difference all until late April. Then it goes up, and then it goes down again from early July. So when we jump to the last 5 years, from 2014 to 18, the picture is like this. It's actually going up. So it means that we freeze ice slower than we did in previous decades. And that was my intuition. That was why I reacted to the statement in the Forbes article, because I knew that the winter was where we sort of collapsed the ice the most. That has been my impression since I started following the ice very closely in 2014. So, sort of after having to concede to Forbes that they were right after all, you know, oh my God, I actually had my intuition was actually right, and my memory was actually right, and we are actually freezing slower than we did 10 years ago. So it's been a sea change between 2013 and 2014. There's been a sea change where you all of a sudden you start losing ice faster, both during winter and during spring, explosively up to summer solstice. And then, of course, because these latest years, there's almost no ice left in the Arctic Ocean, you know, when the summer has done its thing. So then, of course, it's easier to start building ice again, or there's more ice to be rebuilt in a way.
Right, I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that was kind of interesting, but it's not surprising because that Forbes and NASA does this, because we know this from the IPCC process. Every time the climate panel comes out with a new report, they have really old data, because there's a huge process with every science report having to be peer reviewed and accepted into a science magazine and so on and so forth. And then there are deadlines for which papers that are allowed to come into the IPCC process. So it's not surprising to me that NASA is looking at very old data. So they're looking at the situation like it was in 2013, when it was actually rebuilding faster during the winter months, but no more.
But then subsequently, it was, well, I'm not sure, was it the volume or the extent?
This volume.
That was the lowest in 2016. First it was 12 and then it was 16. Am I mixing them up?
Yeah, the 2017, last year, was the lowest year ever for sea ice volume. And that is another fact that's gone totally unreported by Forbes and by every other mainstream media. They never said that. They're still going on the 2012 was the lowest ever, bandwagon. So yeah, it's a lot of things we are not told by our regular media.
No, they lie by omission, because if they did tell, people would get scared and they'd stop purchasing and buying and flying.
Yeah, perhaps.
Or they would demand, like Extinction Rebellion.
It's very
way bigger.
It's very moving, I think, to hear this 15-year-old Swedish girl, Greta Thunberg. She's going out and saying that all of these COP meetings, all of these climate meetings, like the last one now in Poland, they're totally, for nothing, because we've been doing this for 25 years. Of course, she's only been alive for 15 years, but she is demanding that the grown-ups of this world, if there is such a thing, that the grown-ups start actually doing something for the climate, and not just flying around the world to climate meetings to talk bullshit, So,
what would we start doing immediately if you had it in your way?
I can think about that. I'm just going to move through the last final slide here. Is that okay?
Okay.
Yeah. So, okay. So this is a new start I made a couple of weeks ago, and because all the time, latest now was Peter Melton, who asked me what's going on with the sea ice, and that's sort of a philosophical question to my mind anyway, because it depends on what level are you looking at it. Are you lying physically with your nose down in the sea ice, which you sometimes can do if you stumble on the ice. Then you can see lots of white ice, but you can't really get any overview, right? So you have a very close-up view on the ice, but you only see like snow crystals or whatever, right? And you freeze to death. So what's going on with the ice is dependent on what are you talking about. Are you talking about the latest day or the latest month? Or are you talking about what the year is doing, So here you can see since the lowest point in September, the sea ice volume has been going up like this yellow graph, and it's sort of it's nothing very special about it. It's winter, so it freezes back, and it's sort of it's not the lowest and it's not the highest. So it's sort of in the mid ground. And what you also can do is you can average 365 days and get a 1 year average, like the red graph here. and you see that it's almost a straight line. It's nothing happening
Right.
to that.
Right.
It's going up a slight bit because 2018 is a slightly colder year than 2017 was. You know what, with the El Nino that was in 2016-17. It's slightly colder than last year, but I think I heard that the 4 latest years are the 4 warmest years in the Arctic. Anyway, but you know, it goes a bit up and down from year to year, even though we have strong Arctic warming. So, yeah.
Wouldn't you say it's kind of negligible that it'll ever go back to anything else? It's never going to go back.
No,
to
anybody. And you can see that on the next on the right hand on the blue graph, because then I've gone up to a 10-year average, which is 3,650 day average, and made a graph of all the days in the 1979 to 2018 data record for sea ice volume. And what you see here is that it starts out, 1989 is the first point here, because you have to wait from 79 to 89 to get at the first 10-year average. So you see here that it starts out, really pretty flat, going like this. And I think maybe that's the uptick here is due to the Pinatubo volcano, because that set back the climate warming for a couple of years, because the soot and the sulfur and stuff was sort of blocking the sun for some months there. And the scary thing, apart from the shape of the graph itself, which is very, very quickly down, is that if you look very finely at the graph, or use a computer script to look for when the last time it went up, then you find out the latest increase of this graph was in March 1993. In fact, it was
a little bump.
Huh?
A little bump.
Yeah. So in fact, the exact day was my father's birthday in 1993. So, so I remember
Significant for you.
Yeah. So since 93, we have had no upticks on this graph at all, ever. And to me, it shows that we have passed the tipping point, in the 80s or 90s. And after that tipping point, it's just going down, 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 down. And it's, like you said, you have to be kind of a fool to believe that this graph is going to go back up again to the way it was when you and I were teenagers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And do you think that these magazines falsely, some of these articles falsely give the reader the impression that there's a possibility? Oh, yeah. Especially for those that don't really read?
That's a very good question, because I think... Hello? Are you there? Yeah.
I'm here.
Yeah,
I'm here.
I think it's kind of related to the fact that nobody I've ever heard of, anyway, have ever made this 10-year average graph that I just showed you. And even I haven't made that graph before this winter, and it's I think the way they report on it is dependent on what kind of data and graphs do they get, from the specialists, from the experts. And if they had displayed this graph on top of the Forbes magazine article, I think advertisers would cancel their advertising in Forbes, and I think maybe a couple of stock exchanges would go belly up.
You think?
Because there's no Paris Agreement or anything to see in this graph. It's just a hellish apocalyptic kind of direction, don't you think?
I do think. I've been talking to you for a couple of years about this, and we know that there probably has been the blue ocean event. It's just not been so publicized or apparent, maybe with a little ice floating around, but as close as we've talked about.
Yeah, I don't actually think we have been below 1 million square kilometers, which is
that the cutoff?
Scientific cutoff for so-called ice-free.
Okay.
But you can tell that they are getting afraid of that happening very soon, because one of the very clever, very sly things that the climate panel did in their latest report back in 2014 was that they added in small print a little thing about the blue ocean event, or the first ice-free summer day. They put in a totally absurd requirement for a summer to be ice-free. It would have to be 5 summers in a row that were all ice-free, you know.
Really?
So even though we could get a summer with absolutely no ice at all, no ice drifting around at all, the climate panel and the UN would say, no, it's not ice-free because it's only 1 year. You have to wait 5 years to know if it's every year. And then if one of those next 5 years would be a little bit of ice, and they would say, no, we can go on to 2100
No matter what weather events are happening around the world due to this, they're still going to be in denial.
Yeah. So I think the only solution is to say, like Greta Thunberg, that no, we're not going to come here and ask you to do anything, because we know you never do anything, So
exactly.
Just to give up the entire UN track, because if it's like Albert Einstein's definition of madness is to do the same thing over and over again and expect a different outcome,
Bingo.
That's insanity.
Well, what would happen? What would replace, something with a sense of urgency, a group of scientists with a sense of urgency? It would replace this 24-year and look where we are, nowhere panel?
Yeah, I think it's a good question again. You've got loads of them today. I think, when you look at it, because I don't believe in coincidences and, bad luck and all of that thing, bad luck for 25 years. When you look at it, it looks more like, a plot, some kind of plan to make conservative reports and to make society not realize the real danger, the real scope of the danger for as long as possible, So which energy industry do you think could be behind such a plot?
Oh, take a guess. I mean, and then who else is cheering this on? Who's cheering the Blue Ocean event on? Russia. They want to be through there and drilling, and I mean, it's just sometimes you just do feel like it's futile.
Yeah.
But then you get a 15-year-old like Greta, and you can't feel like it's futile. There's got to be a fight till the very end, at least how I feel.
Yeah, I think it was very impressive how she traveled to London to greet the Extinction Rebellion for their first demonstration on October 31st. That was really brave, I think,
Well, it's spreading because there's a New York City training on the 13th.
Yeah, I know. And
yeah.
You also have the climate mobilization in New York, which is cheering on big time for Extinction Rebellion, and also working to spread it to San Francisco and to America at large. Yeah.
I think it's great. This is what I've been waiting for, in a way. I mean, I may not be able to participate, but I certainly can cheer them on.
Yeah.
And I do like the climate mobilization because I think it's a good way for localities to prepare, but you have to get the buy-in. You know, when you live in certain places like I do in the United States, which is very red, which is maybe, I don't know, there's farmers though, it may not be climate denier central, but it's hard to get any kind of buy-in.
Yeah. And I also think that what you said, that this is what you've been waiting for. One of the reasons Extinction Rebellion is expanding so extremely fast compared with other movements is that everybody has been waiting for this, you know. Even I, who actually gave up on activism 5 years ago, I've been waiting for this like for 20 years because there's not been anything as radical or as needed as this, because these people have the audacity and the ambition to have a regime change in the entire Western world, in Europe and America. So,
and I cheer it on. And if it comes to a city near me and I'm able to, I might participate in something.
Yeah, well, you live in a state called New York. I think there is a big city in that state.
But well, the biggest city near me is Buffalo. And actually, let me tell you, Buffalo, because it's on the border of Canada, and Buffalo has a lot of activists. Buffalo's really full of activists. So I could see Buffalo being a hub, for Western New York, because if it's in New York City, I would say Buffalo would be a perfect accompaniment, put it that way.
Wasn't Buffalo a hub for the New York Mafia, for Lucky Luciano as well?
Buffalo? I don't know. You're asking me something I don't remember. I'm actually from New York City area, so I remember the mob is down there.
I think maybe Luciano did some jail time in Buffalo, and then he moved his entire operation to Buffalo, or his office. Yeah.
Well, you know more than I do about that one.
Yeah, something I saw on YouTube, I think. Yeah.
We're dealing with current mobsters.
Yeah.
In New York State, really, right up here, and they're bidding and rigging on buildings, and actually, believe it or not, this guy named Simonelli and this other one they're going to jail because of the Solar City bid rigging on building it, and now it's Tesla here.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, it's like, even something good is corrupt. I don't think there's anywhere in the world that is not corrupt in some way.
Yeah, but they're corrupt in a good way? Or?
No, in some way. Oh. What's corrupt in a good way?
I don't know.
The only thing that would be corrupt in a good way is anybody infiltrating something.
Yeah.
For the good of everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I liked your graphs. I thought this was really good, and it was helpful for me. Me who is usually graph illiterate, and when I sit through, when you explain, and probably for a lot of people, it's really good. And you're talking south is excellent. The long one, it was like an hour and 12 minutes. So I learned, and so if you keep doing this, you're just going to grow, because people really need to learn. There's a thirst, I mean, for 2 years I've been on this quest, so you've helped a lot.
Yeah, I was kind of inspired by this Extinction Rebellion, one of the founders of that, this Roger Hallam guy.
Yes.
Because he made a claim in one of his presentation videos about one of the Arctic sea ice graphs from a guy called Vipnius on the Arctic Sea Ice Forum. He made a claim that that particular graph had to be the most important graph in all of human history. And I was like, wow, he's actually got a point. And it's like, so you could say in a way that this Extinction Rebellion movement is is sort of, let's call it Arctic Sea Ice nerd extremists or something.
Well, I'm thrilled because he accepted me as a Facebook friend, and
Yeah, me too.
I
Me too.
would love to interview him for Environmental Coffee House and introduce him to that, the followers are, because they're so varied and different than, let's say the doomosphere,
Yeah.
so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think they've done something very good too, because a lot of those people in England, they've been in the Occupy movement, which you had in America and New York, of course, as well. Occupy Wall Street. But they've learned from or after the Occupy movement, they learned to, ditch the huge consensus meetings where you had like hundreds of activists trying to reach a consensus. It takes forever, and and only the sort of slacker, unemployed people are able to stay for the entire meeting.
Or disabled ones.
So they actually they have learned from which things were good and which things were not good about Occupy, and so they've made a more efficient decision-making process, while keeping the flat structure and everything, but making a more activism directed organization, because their goal is not just to sit around and have huge meetings where everybody gets their say. They
or fundraise for administrative costs.
Yeah, they want to actually do something. They want to get out there and do something. And
well, coupled with, I guess, with the other ones, Extinction Rebellion, coupled with the climate mobilization, coupled with We Don't Have Time and scientists warning, and possibly getting the links together for a huge.
Yeah, that's this joining of forces you're talking about. That's actually exactly what's happening now, because the same people who are on top of climate mobilization are also administering certain aspects of the rebellion. So this is growing together faster than you and I can talk about it.
Well, I always say, if we're going to go down like the Titanic, we might as well go down fighting with some class.
Yeah.
And this is what I see happening.
And I think that's a good point to round off this edition.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you very much for coming on the show, and thank you, of course, for sending me this story by Forbes magazine. Maybe I'll tweet the journalist this video after I save it and upload it.
Yeah, right on.
Do you think he'll like it? Do you think he'll comment on it?
Possibly, if he's really a serious journalist.
Yeah.
I mean, I did a live stream tonight. I talked about criticism, being able to take it and use it.
Yeah.
And if you can't, then what are you going to do? I've been criticized lots, and I've grown from it.
Yeah.
So maybe he'll be one of those. Maybe our faith in some reporter might be redeemed.
Yeah, maybe I can send it to the NASA report guys and girls as well. So.
Yeah, well, forget about them. But listen, good night. Have a wonderful evening, and thank you very much for having me.
Yes, thank you very much. Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.